Hey, St. John. Welcome to the Post-Sermon Podcast. This is Deaconess Dahlia, and with me today is Pastor Adam.
Hey, Deaconess.
How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I am doing well. So this is kind of a cool episode because we're actually recording this from San Antonio, Texas.
Yes, we just finished up a conference with deaconesses.
Yeah, the Concordia Deaconess Conference met in San Antonio for a few days. And Pastor Adam, you are the spiritual advisor. That's why you were there, just to clarify.
That just meant I led worship and preached. But
exactly.
You are all very busy with other deaconcy things.
Yeah, it was definitely a great time to have fellowship with the sisters and be nourished in the Word and just be away for a few days.
Yep.
So it was nice. But we had to record this podcast.
And
so
that's why the audio sounds not as great.
Sounds different.
It's our mobile recording.
So we are going to be discussing your sermon from this past Sunday. Tell me a little bit about the text that you preached on.
Yeah, familiar text, I hope for us all. It's a parable of the prodigal son. And it was the whole of Luke chapter 15. The lectionary offered just verses 1 to 10, which would be the lost sheep and lost coin, or you could read the prodigal son. And I wanted to read the whole chapter as part of our getting ready for the sermon itself.
Now, we have heard the prodigal son quite a bit here at St. John.
That's right.
Yeah, it was the theme reading for Lent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I am curious why you still chose this text to preach on, even though we've heard a lot of it.
Well, to preach on, part of it is just, the lectionary has assigned readings, and you have to deal with them. And part of having to deal with them is having to deal with them again. And so I thought, back when we were planning the Lenten study, I knew this was going to come up in the summer. And just to kind of have one more opportunity to wrangle with the parable, I thought would be a good exercise in sermon preparation, but also for us as hearers, when we come back to familiar passages in Scripture, just what do you do? Because it's easy for us to sort of glaze over those verses as we do our Bible reading plan or whatever.
What was the central teaching of your sermon?
What I wanted to get across in the sermon was the idea that God's words, even the well-worn words of Scripture, they do speak to us still today, and they have plenty for us to say.
And I noticed for this reading that you didn't just include the prodigal son, that you expanded the reading to include the other two parables, or
Yes.
three.
Yep, so 3 total parables.
Oh, three total, okay, gotcha.
Yep, and part of this was just to begin the process of reestablishing the context of the parable of the prodigal son. I mean, most of Lent, we just kind of plucked this out of Luke 15 and just sort of interacted with it on its own. And I wanted to put it back in the text and start to broaden our context. And there are 3 consecutive parables where Jesus talks about something that is lost and is found. And the context for that is he's dealing with the Pharisees who are upset that Jesus is eating with tax collectors and sinners. And so the first step was just, let's read the parable in its fuller context would be a good way to go.
I really like the imagery that you gave us of a tree or a twig, and how there are then when you include the context of a passage that kind of is like the leaves and
Yes.
all of Scripture is a tree. If you want to
Yes.
kind of explain that a little bit.
Yeah, I was just looking for an image to ground the sermon in. I was a little worried it was going to tend on too much explanation and to kind of get lost in what I was doing, because basically it's just saying, hey, we should add a little more context. Let's add a little more context, and let's add, how about the whole context of the whole Scriptures? And so I thought this idea of a tree would be helpful, and to remember that even just the readings that we have on Sunday, this is the word of the Lord. It absolutely is, and thanks be to God. But there's more to delight in with the Scriptures and to see their unity and their wholeness, whether just immediate context, the whole book, or the whole of the Holy Scriptures.
How did you intend to benefit your hearers in their faith or life?
To me, this is a challenge I experience when I read through the Scriptures, just in devotion or sermon preparation. What do you do when you come back to something that you've heard before or you think you know is about, and what else is there to say or to hear about certain passages of Scripture? I think that's a really good skill for us to develop, is to have ears and eyes to hear and to see what's going on in these passages, even the ones that we think we have such a good handle on. The Lord has more to say through his word, and his word does not come back void.
Something that I really like that you pointed out in your sermon was you focused on like the rejoicing that happens, like when the father welcomed back the prodigal son, and when the woman found her lost coin, and then when the sheep was found as well. I don't know, I thought that was just really nice. And maybe I guess my question is, why did you, or what stuck out to you about that, like, and why you decided to go with that?
Yeah, I think this is one of the key ways that we start to see unity in the scriptures, is to look for common ideas and themes, the repetition of thoughts. And so I do this over and over in the sermon. And so you see the rejoicing, right, as you said, of the shepherd, the woman, and then the father, when the things that are lost are found. But then I'm going to look for a common theme in Luke. And that's where I talked about Luke is super detailed, and so he's going to include all sorts of stuff, but it's also the restoring of relationships is a theme in the whole gospel. And then for the scriptures themselves, and that's honestly why I used the tree thing, was I knew I could talk about the tree of life in the beginning and the tree of life at the end, and in the middle of all that is the tree of the cross. And so as readers of scripture, we trust the Spirit's guidance in the scriptures, as they're all written by various authors and across a few different languages. There is one author that's binding these together, and the overarching story is to give us Christ, and how do we see that? And so that's such a helpful approach. And going back to the rejoicing point, it's easy to lose the rejoicing point when you only look at the parable of the prodigal son. That was kind of a question I asked myself. If we only had this parable in sort of silo and vacuum like we did for Luke, what are we missing? And that kind of led into the rest of the sermon.
Can you tell me something about the text that did not make it into the sermon?
I think one thing I could have dwelt on is the opening verses of the chapter, which is the impetus for the parables, is the Pharisees are upset that Jesus is eating with tax collectors and sinners. In this moment of Luke's gospel, and I think I've talked about this in other times in dealing with the parable, but in this part of Luke, it's really difficult to arrange like a chronology, or like okay, where's Jesus? Where is he on the map on the way to Jerusalem? It's hard, he's heading to Jerusalem, but there's very little structure in terms of, okay, he's at this person's house, he went to this place, and the only sort of structure you get is Jesus keeps going back and forth in conversation between Pharisees and disciples. And I really love that idea of to whom is his teaching directed, and how that comes out of Jesus' mouth does vary on his audience. And in a way, by the time you get to Holy Week, all the different crowds, disciples, Pharisees, crowds, they all kind of merge into this one group of falling away or turning against Christ. And so it's neat to kind of see that progression.
That could definitely be a future sermon idea.
Yep.
This ends our discussion today. If you would like to listen to the sermon again, you can find our sermons on the church website at stjohndublin.org, or the link to the sermon will be in the show notes. If you ever have any questions on a sermon, please email us at podcast@stjohndublin.org. Thank you, Pastor Adam, for joining and feeding us the word this week.
All right.
All right, take care, you guys. Bye.
Bye.